One of the biggest advertised features leading up to the release of Fallout 4 was not only the sheer variety of weapons that you could find in the world, but the near infinite configuration options that the workbench system provided. G'day friends, my name is Milkies, and today, the only guns that I'll be needing are attached to either side of my torso, as we ask ourselves, can you beat Fallout 4 by using only throwables? We start off by naming our hero, John Christpope. Why, I hear you ask? Well, originally, I was going to try beat the game by strictly adhering to the 10 commandments. I changed my mind almost immediately after creating John, and I was far too lazy to start again. I randomly distributed my special points because, as you have just seen, I had no plan. Before I know it, me, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and son escaped to the vault, narrowly avoiding nuclear annihilation. Once we were inside, I got cozy in this cold bed and waited for my divorce lawyer to arrive. He took care of whoever my wife was and then made my child support payment disappear like a magician. As a freshly single bachelor, I headed back to a peaceful sleep, only to be woken in a cold sweat with an overwhelming sense of post-nut clarity. Maybe it was wrong to have my wife murdered before giving away my only child to a stranger. In that moment, I decided to make things right by embarking on a quest to get my son back. Emboldened, I made my way through Vault 111, where I deftly evaded the giant biting cockroaches. After sealing those horrifying creatures behind this trusty door, I borrowed this Pip-Boy from a former person, and then it was time to leave the safety of the vault behind. My first stop was Sanctuary, where I verbally and physically abused Codsworth for allowing my house to become a giant pile of shit. That stupid robot had made me so angry, in fact, that I entirely forgot about the extra special point in the house. I made my way past Red Rocket, where I did not pat the dog. I did, however, scavenge around and find a couple of grenades, which I used to exterminate the local mole rat population. After poking around underground, I eventually made it to Concord, where, in an ironic turn of events, it was Preston Garvey's settlement that required help. I obliged his request and promptly barbecued the several raiders that were laying siege outside, before continuing my journey to Diamond City. On the road, I found myself seeking safety behind a billboard while two groups of raiders battled it out in the wasteland, afterwards leaving the scraps for me to gobble up. After that, I used my expertise in negotiation to settle a dispute between Trudy and some sketchy chem dealers, my efforts earning me 100 caps. I traded with Trudy and her crack-addicted son at the diner, and then the journey to Diamond City continued. On my way, I passed through Lexington, where I discovered that the neighbours were quite unfriendly to newcomers. After escaping the ghouls, I played a game of 1v1 pickup basketball with this guy, who, despite my best efforts, refused to let me score a goal. I was so impressed by his defense skills that I left him to be king of the court, and instead, I offered my moral support to Paladin Dance from the safety of this impenetrable fence. Once the battle was over, I made acquaintance with the Brotherhood of Steel, who invited me on a recovery mission with Paladin Dance. After pilfering everything that wasn't nailed down from the police station, me and Dance, but mostly Dance, cleared the way to ArcJet Systems. Here, I cowered behind the mighty Paladin, who managed to kill the bad guys and find the MacGuffin all on his own. Unfortunately, the one time I did try to help, Dance got caught in the way of a firing rocket engine, leaving him burned to a crisp. This was a horrible occupational injury, which could have been avoided with proper use of a hard hat. Nevertheless, we persisted through a few more rooms full of baddies, and we eventually managed to find the deep-range transmitter. For my bravery, Paladin Dance rewarded me with his very own laser rifle, but sadly, she took an unintended dip in the river. After a brisk moonlight walk through the remains of Boston, we had finally made it to Diamond City. Like any sane man, I skipped through Piper's dialogue as fast as humanly possible, before selling off all my goodies to the local vendors. After that, I bought as many Molotov cocktails as I could carry before returning to settle some unfinished business in Concord. Now that I was properly armed, I charged in headfirst to save Preston Garvey from the raider threat, and then I bravely defeated the invading British Redcoats with nothing but my bare hands. After an uneventful conversation with Garvey, a stroke of genius reminded me to pick up the perception bobblehead on the desk, and then I made off like a bandit through the front door. I quickly disposed of the raiders in the street, then triggered the death claw to spawn. Now, I was under the impression that this would have been my first real challenge of the run, but a well-placed grenade crippled the death claw immediately, which made luring it into my explosive trap incredibly easy. After that, I returned to Diamond City, where I was forced to endure yet another excruciating conversation with Piper. Once the cock and ball torture had concluded, it was time to save everyone's favourite 1930s detective from 1930s bad guys. I headed down to the subway station, where I went in full noise, which sort of worked until a well-timed shot from this well-dressed man caused a firebomb to blow up in my face. After several failed attempts, I had actually managed to get a good run going. However, I was running dangerously short on throwables, which left me in a pretty precarious situation. I decided to conserve my remaining ammunition by running past the remaining bad guys. Once inside, I was forced to use one of my few remaining firebombs on an epic 180 triple kill before sneaking past Dino to rescue Nick. I let Valentine take point through the vault, but I couldn't help but act on the opportunity to spawn camp these three poor souls with a landmine. Once we were face to face with Skinny Malone, I used my patented technique of smoking crack to slow down time before blowing him up with a frag mine, which left both Nick and Skinny grievously injured. Once that business was over, I managed to return to Diamond City in one piece. I took some time to restock on throwables and get rid of all my shit before I had to engage in yet another unbearable conversation about my stupid kid. Nick and I then committed felony breaking and entering into Kellogg's house, where we discovered his sex dungeon. Then we set out to complete what is objectively the worst quest in the entire game. Seriously, I don't know how this got past testing. We followed the stupid dog to the lake, then through the river, and then over the bridge. Along the way, I got into several scuffles, which resulted in more deaths than I'd like to admit. After suffering through several restarts due to self-inflicted stupidity and mutant bear shenanigans, I had made it to Fort Hagen mostly unharmed. I took a few minutes to pull off a sweet dunk, and then it was time to head inside. To get through this section, I used copious amounts of explosives to turn the resident synths into scrap metal. Then I filled my pockets with an array of useless crap. I took a trip down the elevator and then through the service tunnels, where me and Nick fought through several more waves of enemies before meeting face to face with Kellogg. Now, a neat trick that I discovered here is that it turns out Kellogg doesn't become hostile to you until after you talk to him, meaning that as long as you stay out of his radius where it forces you to talk, he will just kind of stand there like an idiot. It took a few tries to get the distance right, but standing on this rail allowed me to throw the landmines in just a way that I killed Kellogg and not myself. We retrieved whatever the fuck we were supposed to get from the Kellogg quest and then took some time to admire the splendor of the Pridwin. Me and Valentine then set out for Goodneighbor. Along the way, I stopped at the comic book store, but I was swiftly deterred by the ungodly odor of the Smash players who had gathered inside. Upon our arrival, I took my time pilfering through people's homes and committing several counts of murder. I then gathered my victims' closest possessions and sold them to the shopkeeper for a quick profit so that I could buy some more ammunition. Soon after, we met up with Doc Amari for the stupid memory thing that was really boring. But, to sum it up, we have to head into the Glowing Sea to find Virgil. Before venturing into the Glowing Sea, I thought it would be wise to stop at Sanctuary, where we could perform a little trick that I learnt from a fellow Fallout enjoyer, Mitten Squad. The trick was to break down all of the wood in Sanctuary, and then turn it into hundreds and hundreds of fence posts. By doing this, I was able to level up a few times, but better yet, I was able to trap Preston where he can never make me or anyone else help another settlement ever again. With the levels I had gained, I was able to put some perk points into rad resistance and demolition. This increased my damage with explosives by 50%, as well as giving me this cool little throwing arc. I thought this would come in helpful for my dangerous trek across the Glowing Sea, but to my surprise, the trip was mostly peaceful. I did, however, eventually find my way to Virgil, who then shot me in the back for failing to read the dialogue. After reloading and actually listening to Virgil's instructions, I was sent on my way back to Boston to kill the Courser. By using nothing but my natural intuition, I was able to find the Courser's location without spending 20 minutes listening to radio frequencies and walking around like an idiot. I knew this quest was going to be painful when I was going in, but fuck me, this ended up being harder than Prince Andrew at a Wiggles concert. The first floor proved to be an arduous challenge, but after several attempts, precise grenade placement allowed me to finally proceed. All was well until I reached the bridge on the second floor. First, I tried rushing, and then I tried stealth. However, everything is a 50-50 chance. You either do it or you don't. So, after 15 deaths and repeatedly throwing myself at the enemy, I had finally made it across the bridge. The rest of the building became a veritable inferno of explosive chaos, as I relentlessly dished out destruction via frag mine, which left a trail of dismembered foes in my wake. In the end, the Courser was no match for me. I used the same crack smoking strategy, and then hucked about 5 landmines at him. Once he was down, I swiped the thingamajig that I needed from the Courser and then nonchalantly abandoned the hostages. Once again, my primal instincts negated the need for pointless busywork, which led me straight to the hideout of the railroad. After a small difference of opinion, the railroad operatives successfully decoded the Courser chip for me and sent me on my way. For reasons that will become apparent soon, I chose to side with the Brotherhood of Steel. After a short joyride to Boston Airport on Paladin Dance's Vertibird, I boarded the glorious Pridwin and received my next assignment, which was the ethnic cleansing of Fort Strong. We approached via Vertibird, but due to the large concentration of enemies and my conscientious objection to cutting them down with the minigun, the game had prevented me from landing at my mission objective. I thought I was soft-locked, but after some fast travel shenanigans and a brief swim, I was able to enter the area from land. Once I had finally arrived, I found that the so-called super mutants were no match for firebombs. Even the behemoth stood no chance against me, as a set of conveniently placed power armor prevented it from one-tapping me with his ranged attack. The power armor made clearing out the inside of Fort Strong an absolute breeze, and I was able to wrap up the mission shortly after. As such, we returned to the Pridwin to give Elder Maxon the good news, and then we get straight to work building the really silly and convoluted Institute teleporter machine. This process was extremely painful, I cannot emphasize that enough, and it required like 3 attempts to get right. Eventually, construction was finished, and I was told by the boss man in no uncertain terms that my mission objective was to retrieve a scientist from the Institute and come straight back. What actually happened was that I walked in and immediately forgot what I was meant to be doing. So, I punched Grandad Sean right in the mouth, blew his shit up, and then left. After having my ass ripped by Elder Maxon for my blatant insubordination, I was headed back to the Glowing Sea to get ammunition for our approaching assault on the Institute. I must have gone too far off track at this point because I ended up in ancient Egypt. Luckily for me though, the alien builders were courteous enough to leave a stockpile of nuclear warheads in between the feral ghouls and the industrial machinery. With the payload secured, I hauled ass back to the Pridwin, only to be sent north to track down a rogue paladin Dance. After an explosive conversation with our robo-curious friend, we continued to collect skulls for the Skull Throne, this time at Railroad HQ. This part proved to be quite tricky to handle with explosives, as more often than not, the tight spaces and small corridors turned everyone, including me, into a fine meaty paste. Once I finally got in, I used my one and only lunchbox mine to kill all 3 of my targets at once. Once again, I grabbed everything I could and then sold it to the vendors in Diamond City so that I could stock up in preparation for the final showdown. Back at the airport, Liberty Prime churned to life and began spouting anti-communist propaganda like a true patriot. I escorted Liberty Prime through the streets of Boston and, much to my enjoyment, our giant death robot respected the spirit of the challenge by also going in Throwables only. After dishing out nuclear death to synths and super mutants alike, we rendezvoused at the Institute and launched our final assault. By this point, I had mastered the art of Throwables, and my enemies stood no chance. I slaughtered not just the men, but the women and the gorillas too. After causing havoc in the Institute, we planted our bomb, escaped to a safe distance, and unleashed total annihilation on the enemy. Therefore, we can safely declare that yes, you can beat Fallout 4 by using only Throwables.